As I said, I'm not Armenian. So I've come here with my half-Armenian husband, Alex. Alex and I have been together for 9 years. And in that time, we've lived in 3 different states, 3 different countries, and we're currently on our 8th apartment. When your base has a habit of changing that often, you begin to feel like an air plant, which doesn't put down roots, but can continue to grow on shifting soil. In 2016, our soil shifted from Doha, Qatar, where we were teaching for 2 years, to Armenia, where we came as volunteers with the AVC. As a diaspora Armenian, Alex had a slightly easier time doing what one type of air plant does, which is that it grows by anchoring itself to other plants for support. As an Odar, it hasn't been easy for me to anchor myself in the same way, but I've learned over my past 17 months here that I, as an air plant by definition does, contribute to the diversity of the ecosystem in which I exist like any other organism. The beautiful thing about moving to a new country, or a new ecosystem, if you will, is learning the beauties and the quirks of its structure while adding your own unique energy to the process. And while it's not always easy, you learn, you adapt, and you continually enrich through new experiences. Communicating those to a non-Armenian family is difficult. And so for today, I've gone back through my Facebook and pulled out the moments that stuck out to me, that gave me insights in learning how to make this community home for me, for my husband, and for our children, who I've gotten the habit of saying, no, we don't have yet. So let's start with holidays. Holidays are an interesting thing to reconcile when you move to a new country. Sometimes they are celebrated in the same way, sometimes differently, and sometimes not at all. So you learn to identify familiar elements. You get creative, you repurpose, and you have sometimes a unique opportunity to make a tradition all of your own. So that's how, with 2 friends and some familiar elements, we ended up with Burger Giving 2017. Meet Tree Gran Metz. Tree Gran was our 2017 Christmas tree. Since we're always moving, we've never had a tree of our own before. So when we moved to Armenia, we decided, let's make a new tradition. We adopted this guy, knowing that he would be replanted in the spring. A sort of symbolic way of putting down our own roots for once in Armenia. And then are those traditions, those holidays that have very deep roots themselves, like New Year. And it feels good to celebrate them the same way as everyone else and with everyone else. And when so many of those traditions take place around the table, it's no wonder my first words in Armenian were, hello, sit down, and eat. Speaking of language, besides actually learning more than those 3 words, I've had a unique opportunity to diversify my pun repertoire in English. Okay. But it hasn't all been fun, largely stemming from my not knowing Russian. And on one occasion, I in fact broke Google Translate. But I've also learned during this time that not everything can be or needs to be translated. When I first came to Armenia, I volunteered in a public school in Yerevan. And between classes, they would send me to the cafeteria/makeshift teacher's lounge. Between classes, I was often sandwiched suddenly by 6, 7, 8 teachers chatting away in Armenian, and as an introvert, I felt really uncomfortable, especially if you remember at that time, I only knew hello, sit down, and eat. But it never stopped anyone from making me feel welcome, because after all, we shared a profession, we shared a presence, and most often, we shared coffee, and that has been and continues to be always enough. Another thing that's hard to translate is the spirit between friends and in neighborhoods. Last winter, all we had for heat was this guy. We called him One Gun Jones. One night, One Gun Jones went out along with the rest of the electricity in the neighborhood. So as you can imagine, it was cold. Nevertheless, our neighbors came over, knocked on the door, and invited us over. No, they didn't have electricity either, which meant it was just as cold. But what I learned from that night is that having people around you here translates into something else. Besides being actual physical body heat, it's community and shared experience. And among many other things, some of my favorite shared experiences are going back to that school where I volunteered and hearing, "Hi, Miss Emily," in the hallways. It's playing Uno with my favorite neighbors. It's coming home from work and having that gardener give us grapes from his orchard. It's cutting down the lilacs from Edward's tree down the street and bringing them home to fill the house, and living the seasons with the people around me. And so, at last, I actually think I find myself in a point where I feel grounded. I feel anchored to and supported by a community that I never imagined calling home, and now I can't imagine anywhere else. And this time, not so much as an air plant, but as an honorary Armenian plant.